Kung Fu.
Show me.
You are the new student. Come closer.
You're listening to the Kung Fu Podcast presented by James Still.
I don't care if it's Muhammad, Imard, Bruce Lee.
And Steve Newby.
This is the original 5 Fingers of Death right here.
But my hands are registered as lethal weapons. That means we get into a fight, I accidentally kill you. I go to jail.
Oh, I'll tell you, it wasn't too bad, mate. Anyway, I think we're going. I think we're recording.
Oh, right, okay.
We should better talk about Kung Fu.
Let's. But I do like a good steak. I have to say, I do like a good steak.
Wow, you gotta like a good steak in Canada, don't you?
Oh my God, some of the steaks I've seen.
Oh, don't.
I don't know how they, they're expensive, but Jesus, the size of them it's stupid.
Right. Hey, we better go. They're playing our song.
Okay.
Welcome to the Kung Fu Podcast. This is episode 2.1. It's 0.1 because we did record one earlier on, didn't we? But we messed up. We messed up the audio, and by we I mean me. So we're having to go again. We're probably going to talk about something completely different. So my name's James Still, and I'm joined as ever by my teacher, Mr. Steve Newby, live from Canada. Say hello, Steve.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Hey there.
Are you?
I gotta practice the lingo.
What part of Australia are you from?
Do you know at work? Yeah, I went to some place and they go, I says, where am I from? And they go, you Australian? I went, I'll give you one more guess. They went, New Zealand. Just thought, I thought,
Yeah. Oh well.
What's the point?
What's the point? So what are we going to talk about today?
Let's talk some Kung Fu. Let's talk about martial arts and Kung Fu in general. Let's try to be, we really do our best not to be, what would you say?
Controversial, ruffle feathers,
annoying. Yeah. But you know what? Politics is politics, and it isn't. It is. People will say, "Well, we don't want to get involved in politics in martial arts." You get into politics the second you buy a banana. The price of it, whether it's come from
free trade,
free trade, and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah. Well, actually, this should be called the Kung Flu Podcast because I'm ill. And
the Kung Flu.
And we've got coronavirus running wild across Europe.
And did you know 30% of Americans won't buy Corona beer because they think it has something to do with the virus?
Wow.
30% of Americans.
Wow.
You've got to look at a country that powerful and think it is the stupidest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Do you know what we're selling? Bottles of hand sanitizer here on eBay for 25 quid.
And you know how much they're selling in America for?
How much?
You can buy a pack for $400.
Oh my God.
And you know how they get around that? Collector's item.
Wow.
Because there's none in the shop.
Wow. Why aren't we in on this?
Well, I'm thinking of sticking some on eBay. I've got a few sanitizers in my car.
All right.
It's always worth carrying a few.
Okay, so question for you. Question alert. I want to talk about people who teach, and in inverted commas, reality-based martial arts. Right. Okay. And I want to know what they know that I don't know in terms of reality-based martial arts?
What is reality-based martial arts? Isn't all martial arts reality-based? Unfortunately, most people don't understand martial arts, so therefore it's not reality-based. So there is, reality-based. That's the basis to Kung Fu. That's the basis to all martial arts, isn't it? Reality. Mm-hmm. That's what you're training it for, reality. How you apply reality, well, it's defined by who you're teaching and how you're teaching them, I guess.
Mm. But what if but they're going to turn around? A lot of people turn around and say, well, Kung Fu is old, and it doesn't take into account the modern world. We've got to learn this and that to fit in with the modern world. I mean,
really,
but what the hell do you say to something like that?
Get a life, I guess.
Mm.
What do you say to that? If you haven't got a history, then of course there's no future. We learn from history, and history is steeped in these fighting arts. It's also steeped in warfare. We learn from the last war, we hope, but of course that's not always the case.
Yeah.
But certainly technology improves every war, and so does, certainly in the days where they would have fought hand to hand, that kind of technology would improve each time as well. So suddenly everybody in a civilian world can fight better than people who have designed it to fight revolutions and mass wars everywhere and so on and so forth, and defending themselves from marauding bandits and everything else. So they think that the local mugger has got more prowess than people who would have attacked you at the click of a finger, just because. So I really find it hard to understand how people can call it reality. When martial arts was originally, you had in the West, you had the karate, and you had then the Kung Fu sort of came about in the 70s, karate kind of in the 60s, and in America probably in the 50s when they come home from the war, Second World War, Japan and so on. Mm-hmm. And they developed it into the 50s and then the 60s, and then the Kung Fu arrived because of Bruce Lee era and so on. And then after that you started getting the Taekwondo turn up, and then people start, I think what happened then is people started to look at these things and how can I do something different, how can I make it different? So you got Indian martial arts, you got Filipino martial arts, you got all of a sudden things were coming out the woodwork, and it got so prolific, of course. Obviously in where I was in Scotland, we had Tibetan Kung Fu.
Wow.
Now I've never heard of Tibetan
what exactly
Kung
is
Fu.
Tibetan Kung Fu?
Well, it's a Shotokan karate guy.
It always is.
Who
a
was
karate
basically basically looking for a different, marketing tool.
Yeah.
It's a product that no one else is selling, and then of course you look at Eskrima suddenly arrives, and then you have Krav Maga suddenly arrives. I had a student who left me in Scotland for one reason or another. I don't know, don't care. He was a bit of not a bad guy actually. He was, believe it or not, he was a what was he? He was a chemist.
Right.
Yeah. No, he was a chemist, but I don't suppose he agreed with some of the things that we had to do to make it work, because it was such a vast area and so on. There were certain rules and regulations we had to adhere to, and he decided he wanted to go off on his own and do his thing. So he went to a Krav Maga course,
right,
for 3 hours, and he became the highest grade Krav Maga practitioner in Scotland.
Yeah.
Within 3 hours of a course.
Wow.
And he couldn't string two punches together, to be frank with you. So you know, it's nice guy. Just, I guess he just thought he could find something.
Well, what grade was he when he
in
left?
another way.
What grade was he when he left?
Well, he did the kickboxing, so
Okay.
I think he was like a black belt in the kickboxing or
Right.
something. But
Well, I
he
mean,
wasn't.
you know.
He wasn't a kickboxer per se. He just did it.
No, just did it.
You know, fitness. It was in.
Yeah, but
you know,
the
late-
opportunity to become the
He was in his
highest
40s.
ranking Krav Maga student in Scotland, or stick with you and remain a black belt.
Well, you know, big goldfish, little goldfish
Yeah,
bowl.
of course.
Little
It gets
goldfish,
everywhere.
big
It
goldfish
actually
bowl.
gets everywhere. Krav Maga these days, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Krav Maga.
Oh yeah, and
does
of course,
get everywhere.
yeah. You got the Russian self-defense
That's
avenue as well.
Systema, isn't it?
Yeah, you got all that.
Yeah.
So all these things have suddenly arrived over the last few years. Well, they've been going now for some time,
Yeah.
and I think these are the people that are saying, "Wait a minute, this is the real martial art," because they're basically doing self-defense that the army is taught to do in various countries.
No,
and
well,
absolutely, I'm sure that many of the techniques should work. They should work. A lot of the time, they don't. You know, but you need them as a last resort, I guess.
Yeah.
There are certain things that you can do kind of stealthily, which of course you could do that whether you was army trained or not. You can creep up to anyone with a knife and stick it in their neck.
Yeah, but look,
In the middle of
Yeah.
Birmingham, you can do that, and you don't need 20 years of fighting experience in the army to do
No,
that.
but here's my gripe. Okay, I'm an ex-serviceman, an ex-infantryman. Okay, I've seen combat in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
what I did in the army bears no relation to martial art. Okay, when I'm walking down the street, the only thing you can make a sort of a connection with is the psychology of combat, but
Yes.
that's very loose. Okay, because you know, I never ever equate what I did in the army, the training I did in the army, with the training I've done in the martial arts, because for me they're totally different.
And as
And
you say,
I don't like people saying, "Oh, because it's an army training, self-defense program, that it, that it's superior."
it's superior.
Yeah.
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and unfortunately, you can't change, the perception, because people think, well, they're into fighting, they surely must be good at it. It's not the case, I'm afraid. But you're right in saying it is the psychology. They have to create that psychology.
Yeah.
Now, that is where we're talking real martial arts. It's got nothing to do with the style. It's got to do with the psychology you create within your training program. Now, some people will be really polite to their students and nice, and it's a great club and friendly and everything. And that's absolutely perfect, because I love that. I love doing that. I love, the friendly relationship that you get with students. But there is a certain period in time and a certain period within the process of grading and development of your style or development of your training where you must adhere to a reality check. And that is where the competitive sort of side, the kickboxing, is very useful to raise that game. But also, and of course, you've got to be very limited in what you do technically with people in martial arts today, simply because it is civvy street, and therefore it is going to be pertaining to the certain laws that and regulations that in the event you injure someone, well, that's the end of your club.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it isn't about whether or not we can create reality, it's whether or not each person can train to define their own abilities within reality.
Yeah.
And it becomes the individual's choice, because unfortunately the instructor often is too concerned about the consequences of injuries within the club. And I've seen that too many times, where someone goes crazy and other people don't like it and they complain. What else can you do? You know, there's not a lot you can do, and then you will get groups that will say, yeah, you know, all we want to do is kick ass and punch each other to death and so on. Well, that's absolutely great, but your club is never going to grow, it's never going to build, it's never going to survive, simply because it will be a group of like-minded people who really are not learning martial arts at all because they're too busy, you know, punching the crap out of each other with no tactics or strategy.
Yeah.
If you had tactics or strategy, let's face it, when you look at tactics and strategies and you look at traditional martial arts or ancient martial arts, Kung Fu particularly, you're not looking at war in faction originally, you're looking at monks, and you're looking at the possibility of defending yourself with as little harm to your adversary as possible. So that's the initial development of Kung Fu.
Yeah.
So in the event you could fight like that, just imagine how good you would be to be capable of fighting without hurting anybody. That is the ultimate goal for martial arts.
But let's be fair, you have to train very, very, very hard, and there are not enough hours
that's
in the
why,
day
yeah.
and days in the week for you to do that.
No, that's right. But looking at that concept, you know, we have to accept that's where it comes from. And yes, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, it's definitely necessary to subdue your opponent, but I think people misunderstand. There are two ways of looking at it, I guess, in my view. And the first one is, have I got you know, there's a big guy gonna approach me. He's going to sort me out. He's going to, you know, threaten me, hit me, whatever.
Yeah.
If I consider that I have to try to beat him, then I'm building a mountain. It's so hard. It's going to be so hard for me. He's fitter than me. He's bigger than me. Stronger than me. How am I going to beat him with that kind of psychology? But if I train to the extent where I haven't got to beat him, he's got to try to beat me. I've just simply got to stop him. I've got to prevent him from winning rather than win. That changes the ball game a little bit because the tactics are different then. It's an alternative fighting strategy.
Right.
And it doesn't mean to say, oh, I'm not going to poke him in the eye, I'm not going to punch him in the face. It means you're going to do it at a much better time. You're going to allow him to do most of the fighting. So when we make the other person do most of the fighting, when we try to get the other person to do the attack, then our skill level has to be better. It has to be precise, because we haven't got a lot of time to respond. So it's very easy when someone says, well, and you see it all the time in the street, I'm going to hit him before he gets a chance to hit me. Well, that's the nature of, you know, fighting in the street, if you like. I'm going to beat him before he beats me. But in the event that you are attacked suddenly, and you're able to prevent that attack because you have a method of defense which, well, we'd have to go through the way that the Kung Fu works, in the sense that the forms and so on and so forth. You see, people misunderstand the concept of form. In the event, a form is developed around you, if you understand what I'm saying. So basically, when you do your movements of your form, you do your movements relative to your body and not to the relation of anyone else, only to your body, which is why you can practice it alone, which is what it's for, to practice it over and over again, millions of times or thousands and thousands of times. And once you've practiced it that way, and it's an automatic movement to a specific point, then what tends to happen is you then need to practice with people to digest those movements. You then need to practice against someone and that's where people fall down, to be honest with you, because a lot of them don't actually do the fighting. So, but if you are fighting and you don't stray from those techniques or the position of those techniques, it's like having a form of a shield around you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
It does. It's very difficult to explain it on a podcast, but people will say, "Well, what's that all about?" And that. I'm getting a bit deep.
You're pre-programming yourself.
That's right. You pre-program. I mean, it's much easier to see it as a response action. It is a counter action. It's not an initial action.
It is,
counter effective.
But so it's worth saying, though, although you are pre-programming yourself with certain techniques, unless you have another person, unless you have the tactics and strategies, you will not be able to effectively apply.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. But if you then this is the problem. You said that people it's the misconception of martial arts, or in specifically martial arts that do sets. And I can't speak for other martial arts, karate, taekwondo, whatever, because I obviously I don't do that. But
but you have
as
seen
far
them.
as
You have seen them.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I don't really want to speak for them for that reason. But when you look at the amount of techniques in a form of kung fu, and I talk specifically Lao Gar because that is my style, then you're talking thousands of different reasons to use it, and lots of different ways and so on, and so you're creating a method of defense. Now, if you can imagine that you train those over and over again so that they become automatic, then you, as you say, you have got to then start to create awareness of how those techniques will work with other people. In other words, you've got to have a partner, you've got to train, which is why you need clubs to be successful. You need a lot of people in clubs.
Yeah, it's socially diverse.
It's very difficult. Yeah, that's right. It's very difficult to become good when you haven't got the diversity of larger, smaller, lighter, faster, stronger, weaker, slower people. Right? So you've got to work with them, but of course you've got to work with them, not against them. But the point is, you cannot have a reaction without a stimulus. So the whole concept is to work the fastest possible action, to be thwarted by the fastest possible reaction.
In other words, you want really good attackers.
Yeah, you need good attackers. If you don't have good attackers, now I've been to classes or watched people teach other clubs. I've gone to watch competition occasionally, where the guy is teaching his style, whatever, and he turns to the students and says, if you go to a club where they ask you to attack, then you should leave that club immediately, because it's not about attack, it's about defense. And then no one attacks. Well, then no one can defend. You cannot defend against anything unless you have a decent attacker, and therefore many of the martial arts that tend to be very passive and very
Aikido.
Well,
and I don't say Aikido in a derogatory sense. I'm just saying that's sort of
that's the way that they train.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it does look absolutely beautiful, but
it does.
We have to. You have to accept to a certain point that they are not attacking them with any great degree of intent.
Well, their intention is to grab. Their intention is to try to get hold of. They're not really throwing punches at any speed. They're not really throwing multiple punches, and so on and so forth. So it can be. It's very limited in the training is very limited. That's not to say that any individual practitioner of Aikido could improve on that, and they could actually get people to attack better. But as a class and as a structure of curriculum, it's very few and far between that will happen. So in general, it tends to be, as you say, seems to look more passive. You've got to have good attackers, and if you don't have good attackers, you can't be a good defender. So, but you've also got to have that the definition of techniques that will automatically respond and automatically move into the position of defense, a block or whatever you want to call it, a parry, that will always go to the same place automatically without you physically attempting to do it. It will just do it automatically, called kinesthetic perception. You respond to the actions against you.
But this is where
in doing so,
teaching forms, learning forms, comes
that's
into
what.
its own.
But that's what forms are all about, and people have a complete misconception of why do we practice forms. Well, the problem is people practice forms and they still look the same at Black Sash that they did when they were, a beginner or when they learned that form. So that's the biggest issue for me, when people train forms and then they don't actually digest them, develop them. Not only do they not know what the techniques may be for, but they use the same size techniques as they did when they learned it. So their arms are, flailing about in very large postures. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. And when people try to make that work, it's too slow because the movements are too big. And it's easily, what's the word? You can see it so easy. What's the word?
Obvious?
I've forgotten.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, they're obvious, but it's
elongated,
telegraphed, if you like. They can be
telegraphed,
telegraphed. Yeah. So people do these sets in same way as when they learned them, and you can always tell a good martial artist in the sense that when he's teaching it, of course he will do them in the way that he has to. It's like trying to teach handwriting to beginners, in other words, children, with the big A and the big C, which we've talked about before, and then you then get pretty handwriting. Okay, that's the fluidity of your movements, but you've got to be able to do it at a much I daren't say shorter range, because people think, oh, you're reducing the technique. No, you're not reducing the technique. You're putting yourself in a much better position. Remember, the closer you are, the more dangerous you are.
So
it's simple.
Yeah. What do you say to people then who, going back to sort of reality-based martial arts, if you like, in inverted commas?
Well, they're missing the point.
Yeah, but what do you say to them? They say, right, well, the thing about traditional martial arts is you've just got so many techniques to choose from. You've got thousands upon thousands, and when the time comes, you won't know what to choose at that particular point. How many times have you heard that? Because that people make serious bucks on the back of stuff like that. Certainly, like a lot of ex-doormen who, I've seen it all. I've been on the doors. It's about what works. But it's like, well, hang on. So go on. What do you say to like that?
Well, what works on the doors is just a response to what you see, and usually what you see is exactly the same thing all the time. Right, and so it's going. I mean, if you look at competitive fighting as an example, these people, they train kung fu. Okay, we're very successful. Lao Guy is very successful in competitive fighting. Okay, but you take a look at the best fighters, and what you'll see is 3 or 4 techniques, and that's all you'll see. That's all they need. But to get to that point, you need to understand the other person's techniques. Now, a person can attack you in a multitude of ways, from different angles and different directions and so on, with different a left leg, a right leg, a left hand, a right hand, a combination of all 4. Okay, now if they do that, right, you've got to learn every possible way of defending against them. But once you understand that, in that process, it's very simple to see that they just come in pretty much similar directions. So it's like chipping away at a log. Okay, you chip it away until it becomes a great piece of art. So it becomes a really nice statuesque piece of art, if you like. And that's really what martial arts is. But if you chip away at it first, you've got less to play with.
Sure. If you start limiting techniques that you train.
Yeah,
But-
and that's
but-
what. Yeah,
yeah.
go on.
Go on.
I was going to say, well, that's why you see a lot of martial arts that are very limited in what they do, because they started like that, because their teachers before them said, look, this doesn't work. In other words, they didn't know how it worked, so we're going to throw that out.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're going to start doing only what works.
Well,
Well, when you only do what works for you,
Yeah.
every other person doesn't understand how to make that work,
Well,
so
that's
it gets
right,
diluted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I got a student of mine actually went to a Krav Maga class, and she took a son, and she's quite small statured, and as soon as she got to this Krav Maga class, you know, you can imagine it's like a load of blokes and everything. Although there were some women in the class as well, but you can imagine the sort of dynamic in the class. And the first thing the bloke said was. To her son was, well, I hope he's got a box because he's going to need it, you know. And she's like, well, hang on, you're not kicking my boy in the balls,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But it's like, you know, she didn't last long in that, and
No.
you know, because you've got a small statured person being taught by, you know, aggressive blokes. Where's the correlation there, and and at what point do you say, you know? Because we always say that, isn't it? That martial arts should be for everybody, and when you start limiting techniques dependent on what you're capable of, you know, you're taken away.
Well, then you're looking at you know, people who are devoutly into one specific dynamic. They're definitely aiming for heavy contact. They're aiming for, you know, what they see as reality, because they think that the harder you hit, the more intense or more successful they're going to be. Unfortunately, for them, martial arts, it's art, called an art for a reason. It's not just martial art, it's an art, and the art is to find a way around the more powerful people. It's the whole. If everybody was built like a brick outhouse, then it wouldn't be a problem. You just walk straight in there. And then of course everyone starts sticking armor on and getting heavier, and then they'll sit on a horse and get even heavier, and so on and so forth. That's the concept. You know, right back to, you know, using elephants in warfare. Of course, these things are going to be devastating, but once you use tactics against things like that, for instance, the elephants come, you just move off to the side and they run straight past you. The other thing is, the chariots come. You know how they used to stop chariots? They just simply moved to the side and then killed them from behind, because that's all you do. And then the other thing, of course, is they'd lie down and they just cut at the horse's hooves.
Yeah.
And so the horses collapse. You only need to cut one hoof, and that brings down 4 horses, 6 horses.
I watched Gladiator.
Yeah, well, you know, you learn these things over the years, and I've been doing martial arts that long, you know, but they don't use chariots like they used to when I was a kid. Yeah. So it's common sense that where there's strength, there's weakness.
Yeah, but it doesn't sell. It doesn't sell in
That's
today's
right.
market, right?
Well, shall I tell you what does sell, though, James? I'll tell you what does sell. Where there's weakness, there's strength. So that's what you've got to sell.
Yeah, no.
Because majority of people are weaker, and you know why they do martial arts? Because they know they're weaker. Because they feel they're weaker.
Of course,
they want something to change
you
their
look at all the
confidence.
You know, the mostly aggressive people in the world. They don't want to do martial arts because they think their aggression can take them through. You know, I understand that. I understand that. But going back to reality-based martial arts, you know, you explain to someone, but we only do the techniques that work. We only teach the most lethal techniques, fight stoppers. You know, this, that, and the other. I mean, look at Krav Maga. You know, my student who went there. You know, 1 week she's learning how to disarm someone with a rubber AK-47, and I'm like, you know, you live in Worcester, for God's sake, not Beirut. So it's like, hang on, at what point does like reality-based martial arts just, completely go off the deep end?
Well, they're just trying to sell the army-based
Yeah, well, that's
thing,
what they're
aren't
trying
they?
to do. Like, I just don't get it.
You gotta, live in cuckoo land. Now, I'm not suggesting that given the distances and timing, that you couldn't disarm a firearm. There are techniques given to disarm firearm and to maintain your own firearm. Positions you have to be in to prevent anyone getting to your firearm. For police training and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But let's just get everything into perspective first, shall we?
Of course.
Let's actually try and defend ourselves against unarmed.
Yeah.
Let's try and figure out what we can use as a weapon against a armed person or generally hand to hand and not firearm.
Sure.
Because once you get into those realms, you've gone beyond being capable of learning the most basic things. You're looking at selling it.
Yeah. That's it. Looking at selling it. But how many people nowadays create a martial art? Like they turn around and say, well, I've studied this, I've studied that, I've studied this, I've been doing it for so long that I'm now in a position where I can effectively, make a decision and create a martial art or a system of fighting that, will work. I mean, how many times have we seen that? Whether you've got, people like the, you name people like, there's a guy called Eddie Quinn in the UK. He does The System. There's Jeff Thompson who teaches the pavement arena, the fence combat, and all the rest of it. And lest we forget, there was a system called Fract. Yeah, well, it's true. You're dealing with people who actually believe that they have got a deeper understanding of martial arts than all those who've gone before them, and they're
I guess
to simplify it.
Well, I would suggest that groups like that are not martial artists. Of course they're not. They are looking for a finer way and a shorter way towards practical self-defense. Now that's okay if you simply do self-defense. Maybe, hopefully you're not going to get attacked in the street, but if you do, you create an attitude towards your defensive mechanism. You get angry, you get capable in those types of scenarios. But you're right, if they do profess to suggest they're martial arts, well, of course they're not. But the worst situation, of course, is they completely lose the point about martial arts, and they disrespect the efforts and to maintain martial arts, the whole system, the whole science, so that for people like them, where they've actually taken techniques that they've obviously seen in martial arts and then say martial arts doesn't work. Well, if you've got the technique taken from a martial art, how the hell can you turn around and say martial arts don't work?
Yeah.
Because you're not bothered to learn it all.
Yeah.
If people don't maintain martial arts, they will die, and we can see that now. We can see the destruction of martial arts, and it is for my lifetime, it is my desire, my whole life's work, to try to sustain a genuine, authentic martial art. And that includes the things that won't work necessarily for me, because I'm long in the tooth. I'm not going to be able to do certain things. I'm not going to be able to do things that I could do when I was younger. But that's a good thing, that I can do less and still have a chance of survival.
Yeah.
But that's because I understand every kind of direction, if you understand what I'm saying. Every type of attack, every type of movement. So we're bringing those movements to us, as opposed to building tons and tons of movements, and, if you understand what I'm saying, throwing them out at an opponent. Everyone has to come to you, and that is an advantage. because every time you throw a punch, you open yourself up every time. And who's to say your punch is going to reach? Who's to say your punch is going to succeed? Who's to say your punch is going to be powerful enough? Because it's a moving target. You're not necessarily. I mean, ask any boxer, how many punches do they throw before they actually hit one? And sometimes they hit one, they stun the guy, and then they'll continue to go because they stunned him. That's the only time he's going to stay still. And often he won't stay still. Often he'll dodge, parry, duck, weave, everything, and maybe even just one punch back will finish you.
Yeah.
It's just, that's the way it is. It's just luck in that sense. Of course, luck takes a lot of practice. That's always the same.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
but yeah, and going back to what we were talking about in the last time was about the wild animals. You know, they are going to do their best to survive.
Yeah.
You know, some of them, if they're not stupid enough.
What do you think makes people sort of try and redefine reality? You know, how is reality changed? I mean, from
reality, yeah, reality hasn't changed, James. A punch is a punch, a kick's a kick, and that's it. It's when you do the punch, how much you've practiced that punch to make it successful. Whether you know whether it's going to be successful before you throw it, so whether you should throw it or not, whether you know that you're completely covered when you throw it, so you have a better chance of survival if it misses, and whether you're fit enough to throw it. That's really the issue, and that's the reality. Whether it was 1066 or now, it doesn't make any difference. So as soon as you arm yourself, then weapons just get bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, that's life. But if you're unarmed, and that's what martial arts is about, not necessarily all the weaponry, but we do sustain weaponry because it helps us to sustain balance and movement and posture. And a lot of people have lost that, and that's a shame, really. One of the things that often adversaries or opposition to martial arts is, well, no one's going to come out and throw a sword around at you. No one's going to come out and throw a big stick at you, and so on. But not only can you use those techniques with day-to-day objects, an umbrella or a walking stick or whatever, but you can literally learn to be able to throw techniques without effort, so that the power comes from that technique. Like a sword constantly moving, like the length of a pole, and so on and so forth, and like heavy weaponry that you can use, and it just helps you to sustain balance, to know where you're going to be standing in the next second. It's like being able to tell the future. When you move with a heavy weapon, you need to be in a certain place at a certain time while that weapon is in the air, and you're not carrying the weight of that weapon. And often I see people training weapons, tiger forks, kwandos, that sort of thing, and I see them pulling them around and sweating their knackers off because they're trying to pull the weight of that weapon around, and they don't understand the concept of fluidity. They do not understand that weapon should be in the air most of the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not holding the weight.
Although it looks like it's in your hands, and it is, but it's the direction that weapon is going when it's in your hands, and the use of both hands. Often people are trying to carry the weight of the front end with the right hand, and forgetting that they can use the left hand to lever.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very it's an art.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
training weapons is an art.
Oh yeah, and it's the same people who slag off training with weaponry who train gun disarms with a rubber gun, or will inevitably grab a set of eskrima sticks and start trying to hit each other. It's like, how many martial arts do you see? How many martial arts do you see who, at some point or another, they grab some eskrima sticks and start whacking each other in the class? It's like, Jesus Christ.
Because they've got nothing else they can teach.
Yeah.
They desperately need something to teach. A lot of them haven't got teachers, or certainly have got to a point where they don't require necessarily teachers, although majority of martial artists probably think that anyway.
Yeah.
But it is such a sad affair when you see a genuinely decent martial arts, suddenly, oh, wait a minute, let's introduce this, let's introduce that, we're going to start doing this and doing that.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is when people start introducing things and they blatantly don't work, the Dim Mac
Oh God.
comes to mind
Right.
when people are saying, well, if I pressure like this, and then you see people who would have at one stage had some decorum of decency and some decorum of self-respect giving themselves to these people, where they are going, oh, well, oh, look, he's going to knock me out.
Yeah.
And
Just
he'll knock you
stand
out,
still.
all right.
Just stand
And you-
still while I hit you
and
there.
And do you think it's going to give you some prestige? No, it's not. It just gives him prestige.
Well,
People
all right.
look at you being injured and going,
Yeah.
oh, this guy must be really good. Any teacher who is going to smack their students so that it hurts them and so that they're knocked out or knocked down, well, how many times do you have to do that to prove it works, right? It only takes one person to do it to see that it works, and it's already been done. We know things work, or we know things don't. So, please.
Well, okay. You brought it up. Explain to me what your opinion is on DIMAC, on Death Touch. Like, let's be fair. I know that you're not that bothered with sort of Chinese anatomy and the names of things like bloody Steak and Chips 10 and Lobster Thermidor 41, but but what do you think about it? What's your opinions on it? I mean,
If you want to blind someone,
okay,
Yeah.
go on then. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you want to blind someone with science, then you can come out with all those things, and it doesn't make it any better, and it doesn't help people learn it anymore, in my opinion. But it is only my opinion, of course. You can do what you want, but as far as the technique itself is concerned, it has to work. But don't, the amount of people that say, right, the guy's going to throw a punch at me, I'm going to move to the side, I'm going to do this punch to his chest, I'm going to do that punch to his groin, I'm going to then elbow him in the back of the head, and then I'm going to grab him round the throat and pull him down. Is that guy literally going to stand there after the first punch in the same position? No, he's not. So what the hell are you doing? You've got to give some theatrical license to it, or hurt them. But no, not really, not realistically. You'll run out of people to teach. But of course, when you're running courses for other people's students, you don't give a toss whether those people are hurt by you or not, because they're not your students. You don't care whether they're going to be back at the class next week because they were traumatized by your actions.
Yeah.
You don't care.
I remember you saying to me once, you said something like words to the effect of, we don't need to see him being violent, as in the person doing the techniques on the student, but we need to see the attacker being violent.
Right, exactly. And this is the case in the sense where he's going to throw a punch and I'm going to do this, that and the other. Well, if he's going to throw the punch, let him throw the punch when you're not ready, fast, right? And then see how it works. Okay, because yes, you've got to practice it initially, but if you practice it initially, let's have a fair playing field here. Practice it initially, a nice light punch towards you, giving you the opportunity to block or parry or trap or whatever you're going to do, and then consciously and conscientiously aid the attacker in the sense that you are going to demonstrate where you would hurt them, demonstrate how the technique would work, not just knock their lights out because they've offered you a punch. I have a saying sometimes when people come to me, they say, I went to work the other day and I got this guy in my work who he does judo or jiu-jitsu or whatever, and I told him I did martial arts, I told him I did some kung fu, and he goes, oh I do jiu-jitsu, throw a punch at me, and he does it like, and what do? You go, oh, okay. So you throw the punch, you offer the punch to them, as if you would in early training. And what does he do? He puts you in a lock, throws you all over the place, and just goes, yeah, see, it's better. Well, just don't do that. Turn round. The guy, let's just imagine the scenario is different. So you go down to your work, and the guy is there, and you say, I do a little kung fu. And he says, oh, jiu-jitsu, throw a punch at me, throw a punch at me. You turn around and you just say, no, you throw me. And then he'll try to throw you, and all you do is smack him straight in the ribs with a single knuckle and watch him fold. And then he'll say, why did you do that? And you'll just say, well, you tried to throw me.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because that actually happened to me when I worked at McDonald's.
Yeah.
A guy who was doing jiu-jitsu years and years ago, he said, let me show you a headlock. So he put me in a headlock, and I'm going like that. I thought, oh, for God's sake, no, So I don't like.
So what would have happened if you'd just grabbed his nuts?
Well, funny enough, like at one point my hand did gravitate there, but but
you try to be polite, don't you?
Well,
you try to be polite.
He was my friend.
And this is where, and this is where a lot of the fallacy comes from, where one person is a fan of one type of martial art, another person is another, and it's down to the domination of the character, which determines whether or not you are going to survive that day, in other words, with your ego intact. And the simple fact is that most people who do Kung Fu initially, they're looking at the passive, they can see the passive, if that's a word, passiveness in a lot of the students. There is an awful lot of techniques that don't require direct aligned movement. The whole point is to use their strength, to use their power, and not meet it with force. That's their movement forward creates your force. So for God's sake, please don't try to it's like the two armies on the movies just walking straight into each other, running straight into each other, bang, clashing in the middle of the battlefield. What happens? Well, who wins? No one. It's just whoever's got the biggest pointy stick. So it's just stupid. And how people can think, I mean, there's so many accidents happen in war, just the same as they do in individual fights, that change the course of history. Simply, Agincourt is a really good example. Did you know about Agincourt?
Someone was on a hill.
No, 25,000 French, or 20,000 French people, right? French cavalry and knights, right? And 5,000 English. Most of them archers. And you know why most of them archers? Because they're bloody cheaper. That's why. So they decide they're going to stand there, and in come these knights, and they realise that most of the people in the English army are serfs. They're nothing. They're not worth anything. Well, if you know anything about chivalry, where they capture the knight rather than kill him so that they can ask for a ransom and make money, that's what the French wanted to do, right? So there they do. They attack 20,000 people on horseback, pretty much most of them on horses, with very nice armour. The iron arrows, no way could have penetrated the new steel that a lot of them had.
Yeah.
Okay, they got steel, but what happened was, it's a triangular type of field, and it had been raining. It was muddy. Okay, so they all run into each other. Eventually, by the time they got to the English, most of them were falling off the horses. Most of them were clogged up in the mud. Most of them couldn't get anywhere, right? Because they turned around to go away when they realised there's not that much booty, and they were killing their own people as well, who were following them after the knights. So 20,000 French were slaughtered, because unfortunately for them, archers don't give a shit about chivalry. So they went in there. The knights didn't want to know. The English knight says, we're not going to do that. and they were all stuck in the mud. All the French were stuck in the mud, and the knight says, "Well, the archers and the rest of them went, well, we don't give a shit." So they went in with clubs, big hammers, and axes and whatever, and just killed them all.
Wow.
And that's why there's such a big death toll.
Yeah.
And that's a typical example of how stupidity, bad timing, bad strategies lose battles, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't because of course you'll see the Shakespeare Henry V, when he does his big speech and everything, and no chance. It was nothing to do with the English ability, had nothing to do with the English archers. It was to do with the French mud, and that's all, right? And that's what won the Battle of Agincourt.
So was there a hill? Was there a hill anywhere?
There's bound to have been a hill somewhere.
There you go. So
James.
I knew what you were talking about.
There's bound to have been a hill somewhere.
There's gotta be.
Stand on a hill. Let's stand on a hill.
Oh,
well, bad strategy, 1066, that's bad strategy.
Yeah.
Although I'm glad it happened that way, because where would we be now?
Yeah.
So, because they were on a hill, and then they just didn't listen. They thought they were winning, and they thought, oh, the French are on the run, let's go chase them. So they ran down the hill, lost their good positions, and got splattered, and that's how they lost. And then, of course, Harold got hit in the eye with an arrow, and the rest is history, as they say.
Wow. Well,
but yeah, I love strategy. I love war tactics. I love fighting tactics. Are exactly the same. Fighting tactics in battle are exactly the same as individual fighting.
But that kind of brings us sort of full circle, really, because what really constitutes reality based in this modern world. What you're saying is that the fighting strategies, tactics have not changed since when the first man picked up a pointy stick and tried to club another man, and whatnot.
Yeah, and if you're not gonna use strategy, if your strategy is based on your own strength, then beware, because war is built on the underdog, right? The underdog creates. If you're in a you may have a better army, but you may be in a bad position, right? And so you have to change the tactics and strategies. You may be unarmed, you may be under manned, but so you have to find a way of changing the battle to suit you. Now, these big people, let's just imagine they're like a big army coming at a smaller army. If you're smaller than them, you've got to change the tactics. You've got to change to meet the strategy, your best strategy for that. So you've got to use tactics, and if someone's tactics is just, I'm just going to go for it, then those are not the best tactics, and that's been proven time and time again in battle, time and time again. Adrian, not Adrian. What's the guy's name? Who came from the east and invaded Rome and so on.
Hadrian?
Is it? No, not Adrian. No, Hadrian is he was a bloody Roman emperor.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, come on.
Oh,
anyway, this is something we're going to read up on.
This is too intellectual, Steve. What's going on?
I know. I don't know.
The Romans. I'm just a simple person.
Yeah, the Romans beat him.
Right.
They beat by simply walking away from the battlefield.
Okay.
Yeah, and every time he lined up against them, they walk away from the battlefield. And every time he walked against, set up against them, got all his army together, they walked away from the battlefield, and they got so fed up that half their army started going home. Guess what? Dissipated their armies. Then the Romans fought.
Yeah. So
that's the way. But I wish I knew who he was. No, bloody.
Oh well.
Alexander the Great.
Oh, I was going to say that. I was. Honestly, listen, we got to finish up here.
Yeah.
So we,
okay.
Thank you so much. Thanks again. It was interesting.
I wish I knew more about history. I love history.
Oh well, you see, you got to, you got to study hills in warfare. That's my speciality.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, I told you about my very first battle, didn't I? When I was about 8 years old, and I had a little hardboard axe and a paint tin shield.
Yes, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and I was at the top of the hill, and everyone else was attacking, and that was the best feeling in the world. What a battle! Yeah, wooden sticks, bows and arrows, shields, everything.
Excellent.
My God, that was the best battle.
Listen, we've got to go. We've gone over our time. We've gone over our time.
Again.
So do you want to say goodbye?
Okay, yeah. I would like to say goodbye to anyone who's listening. By all means, I appreciate you may have a different opinion, and I respect that opinion. Just respect mine. And but if you have anything, comments, by all means comment. But don't troll.
Don't troll.
It's below you. Don't troll.
Oh. Okay. All right then. Well, thanks gang for joining us on another episode of the Kung Fu Podcast with me, James Still, and as always with my teacher, Mr. Steve Newby. Take care now, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Kung Fu Podcast. If you enjoyed that and would like to find out more about us, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube under SJN Martial Arts. That's SJN Martial Arts. And please take time to like us, share us, and subscribe to us. We'll see you soon on the next episode of the Kung Fu Podcast. Take care now.